Hey everyone, today I was looking through some old code I wrote for my invoicing platform, PushSilver, and came across a small but sort of interesting spot where I have an input that allows the user to save a comma-separated list of emails into a contact list, kind of like this one we have here in this fresh Laravel application. And in my routes file, you can see when you post to the /companies endpoint that the request is delegated to the company create controller. So let's go in there. This is a pretty typical Laravel controller. You see we do some validation, we create an object, and we return back. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to show the mechanics of how you could validate and sanitize data to store a comma-separated list of emails in the database. This controller works, but you can tell that we're not validating that we're actually sending in any emails here in the contacts parameter. Right now, we're just checking that the parameter is required and that it is string. So we need to add a new validation rule to check that we are passing in a list of emails. But what I would do first is to make sure that I get this controller as is under test. So let's create a new test, make test company create test. And if we open that up, we could say we could test company creation is validated. And in here we can say this acting as user factory create post route companies.create. And here we can pass in just an empty string for both parameters because we want to test that the endpoint is just validated first. We'll also assert that the session has errors, and we'll look for name and contacts. Contacts. And then we'll assert that we're redirected back. If we run this test, we can see that it passes. So the next step is to create a new test that validates if we put incorrect data into the contacts parameter that it will fail validation. So let's copy this, paste right here, and put in some invalid data. And because we're just testing this particular point of validation, let's remove this because it's redundant. If we run this, we can see that the test is failing because technically our validation is passing. So let's create a new email list rule to handle this. Let's go into email list and we'll say string of the value. Let's import the string helper class. Replace any spaces with an empty space. Let's explode the string using a comma. And we'll filter the results. Assuming that this is an email, we'll validate that it is an email. And when emails, which will come in as a collection, if the emails count equals 0, we'll fail the validation with please provide a comma separated email list. Let's import that, and then we'll add it to our controller. New email list. Now, if we go back to our test, we can see that we're not missing any errors. Why is that? It's because we have a missing semicolon. Let's run this again. We can see that the test passes. Awesome. Just as a review, our validation rule is taking the value, it's replacing any spaces with an empty space and exploding the string using a comma, which will actually, under the hood, return a new collection that we can filter and validate each item is a valid email. If we don't have any emails in there, let's fail the validation. So this is half of the work. The test passes, but we're not verifying the emails are actually being saved in the correct format in the database. But now that we know the data is correct, we can sanitize and format the string for storage. And since we're using our test to drive out this feature, let's update our test to check the data is being saved correctly. So we can grab this, paste a new test under here and say company can be created. We'll pass in a valid company name and then pass in david@example.com and demo@example.com. We'll assert that the session doesn't have errors, and then we'll assert that we're redirected back. In addition to that, we'll also check that the database has companies with the name Acme Corp and contacts david@example.com and demo@example.com. And if we run this, this test will pass as is. But we want to make sure that the contact list is being saved with a space in between each email. And if we run that, of course, it fails, but we're almost there. The quickest thing we could do is go back to our controller and add a new protected method called sanitize email list. It takes a string value and returns a string that is formatted the way we like. So similar to the validation rule, we can return a string of, let's do this import, the value Let's replace all spaces with an empty space. Let's explode the value using a comma. And because that returns a collection, we can filter these emails or these potential emails using filter var. Again, filtering the email value. And instead of throwing a validation error, we will actually implode the value using a comma and a space, which is how we want to save the data in the database. And when we're creating our company, we can say this, sanitize email list. And with any luck, our test should now pass.